Kiravel pressed her scaled palm against the cold metal wall of the medical bay, watching the monitors flatline one after another. The Zealothan colony ship, Eternal Dawn, carried 12,000 souls across the void, and she had failed them all. As chief medical officer, she had sworn an oath to preserve life. But the plague ravaging her people defied every treatment, every remedy, every desperate attempt at salvation. The disease had appeared 3 months into their journey to the Kepler 442 system. It began as a simple fever among the younglings, spreading through their communal nurseries like wildfire through dry grass. Within weeks, it had consumed entire families. The elderly fell first, their ancient immune systems collapsing under the assault. Then the adults began showing symptoms, purple lesions spreading across their azure skin, respiratory failure, organ shutdown. Kiravel had seen diseases before. As a xenobiologist specializing in interspecies medicine, she had treated everything from Martian lung rot to Andromedan nerve parasites. But this pathogen seemed almost intelligent in its cruelty, adapting to every countermeasure she developed. Each time she thought she had found a weakness in its genetic structure, it shifted, evolved, became something new and more virulent. The Zealothan High Council had placed their faith in her expertise when they approved this colonial expedition. 15 years of preparation, the largest migration in their species' history, all dependent on her ability to keep their people healthy during the 40-year journey. Now, with nearly half the ship's population already dead and the rest showing early symptoms, she faced the possibility that no Zealothan would live to see their new homeworld. Captain Thainvor entered the medical bay, his usually pristine uniform wrinkled from sleepless nights. The silver scales around his eyes had dulled with exhaustion, and his tail dragged behind him, a sign of defeat among their kind. He surveyed the rows of medical pods, each containing a dying colonist connected to life support systems that merely delayed the inevitable. "The Council demands answers, Kiravel," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command, but also the tremor of a leader watching his people perish. "They want to know if quarantine protocols failed, if there was contamination from the departure station, if someone brought this plague aboard deliberately." Kiravel's throat sacs inflated with a bitter laugh. "Does the source matter now? The pathogen has mutated beyond our ability to track its origins. Every sample I examine shows different genetic markers, as if it's rewriting itself faster than we can study it." She gestured toward a microscope station where viral cultures grew in isolation chambers. "I've tried 17 different antiviral compounds, 6 experimental gene therapies, even primitive chemical treatments our ancestors used centuries ago. Nothing slows its progression." The captain's clawed hands clenched into fists. "Then we're truly lost." Before Kiravel could respond, alarms began shrieking throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the medical bay in red warning strobes as the ship's artificial intelligence announced an incoming transmission. Captain Thainvor rushed to the nearest communication terminal, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. A 3-dimensional projection materialized in the center of the room, showing a vessel unlike anything in Zealothan databases. The ship appeared crude by their standards, angular and utilitarian, constructed from what looked like primitive metal alloys. Yet it moved with surprising grace through the asteroid field surrounding them, its engines producing an unusual blue-white exhaust signature. "Zealothan vessel, Eternal Dawn. This is the Earthship Meridian," came a voice through the communication array. The language was unfamiliar, but the ship's translation systems worked frantically to process the alien speech patterns. "We've detected your distress beacon and are responding to offer assistance. Please acknowledge if you require aid." Captain Thainvor exchanged glances with Kiravel. Humans. They had encountered references to this species in galactic trade networks, but always as distant rumors, a young race barely capable of interstellar travel, dwelling on the outer rim of explored space. What could such primitive beings possibly offer a technologically advanced Zealothan colony ship? "This is Captain Thainvor of the Eternal Dawn," he replied after a moment's hesitation. We are experiencing a medical emergency beyond our current capabilities. However, I'm not certain how you might assist us." The human voice responded immediately, carrying an enthusiasm that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. "Captain, we're prepared to render whatever aid possible. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sarah Chen, has extensive experience with unknown pathogens and exotic diseases. If you'll permit us to dock, we'd like to examine your situation and see what we can do." Kiravel stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. "Human vessel, I am Chief Medical Officer Kiravel. Our people are dying from a plague that has resisted all our treatments. What could your primitive medicine possibly accomplish that our advanced medical technology cannot?" A new voice joined the transmission, female, confident, tinged with what the translation software identified as amusement. "Chief Medical Officer Chen here. With respect, ma'am, sometimes primitive medicine works precisely because it's primitive. We've learned that complex problems don't always require complex solutions. May I ask what treatments you've attempted?" Despite her skepticism, Kiravel found herself explaining the various approaches she had tried: genetic modification therapies, targeted viral suppressors, immune system enhancers, cellular regeneration treatments. As she spoke, she could hear the human doctor asking pointed questions, requesting specific details about symptom progression and pathogen characteristics. "Interesting," Dr. Chen said when Kiravel finished. "Your pathogen sounds remarkably adaptive, almost like it's designed to counter sophisticated medical interventions. Have you tried any broad-spectrum approaches? Simple chemical compounds rather than targeted biological agents?" "Chemical compounds?" Kiravel's voice carried disbelief. "We abandoned such crude methods centuries ago when we developed genetic medicine. Chemical treatments are unreliable, often toxic, and lack precision." "Sometimes unreliable and imprecise is exactly what you need against an enemy that adapts to precision," the human doctor replied. "Captain, if you'll allow us aboard, I'd like to run some tests. I can't promise anything, but I've seen similar patterns before in rapidly mutating viruses on Earth." Captain Thainvor considered the request. Protocol demanded that he consult with the High Council before allowing aliens aboard their ship, especially during a plague outbreak. But the council members were either dead or dying, and traditional protocols had already failed to save his people. What did they have to lose? "You have permission to dock, Meridian. Bay 7 is prepared to receive you." 3 hours later, Kiravel watched through the observation window as the human shuttle settled into their docking bay. The craft looked even more primitive up close: scarred metal plating, visible weld marks, exhaust ports that seemed almost crude compared to Zealothan engineering. Yet it had traveled the vast distances between stars just as effectively as their own advanced vessels. The airlock cycled, and 2 figures emerged wearing what appeared to be basic environmental suits. The human doctor was smaller than Kiravel had expected, her frame compact and efficient rather than imposing. Her companion, presumably a security escort, carried simple kinetic weapons rather than the energy-based armaments common among spacefaring civilizations. Dr. Chen's first words, spoken through their suit's communication system, surprised Kiravel. "Before we begin, I need to observe your quarantine protocols and ensure we don't accidentally contaminate your people with anything from our ship. Patient safety comes first, always." The human's insistence on following proper medical procedures, despite coming from what Kiravel considered a backward species, earned grudging respect. They spent nearly an hour establishing decontamination procedures and ensuring both teams could work safely in the same environment. When Dr. Chen finally entered the medical bay proper, her reaction wasn't what Kiravel expected. Instead of expressing amazement at their advanced medical equipment, the human doctor immediately began examining the patients themselves, checking vital signs manually, observing symptoms with her own eyes rather than relying entirely on the sophisticated monitoring systems. "Your diagnostic equipment is incredible," Dr. Chen admitted as she worked, "but sometimes you can miss patterns when you're looking too closely at the data. Tell me about the progression timeline again. Which demographics showed symptoms first?" As they worked together, Kiravel found herself describing the plague's spread in terms she rarely used, simple observations rather than complex medical terminology. The human doctor asked questions that seemed almost naive. What did the patients eat? Where did they sleep? How did families interact during the early stages of infection? "Your people live in family clusters," Dr. Chen observed after reviewing the ship's social structure. "Close physical contact, shared environmental systems, communal child rearing. The pathogen spreads through respiratory droplets, but it's also showing signs of environmental persistence." "Environmental persistence was one of my first theories," Kiravel replied. "We sterilized all common areas using plasma bombardment, replaced atmospheric filters, even treated the water recycling systems. The pathogen continued spreading." Dr. Chen paused in her examination of a patient and turned to face Kiravel directly. "What if it's not environmental persistence? What if it's biological persistence in an unexpected reservoir?" "Impossible. We tested every species aboard this ship. The food animals, the plants in the agricultural sections, even the bacterial cultures in our waste processing systems. Nothing showed signs of infection." The human doctor's expression shifted, and Kiravel recognized the look of someone forming a hypothesis. "Dr. Kiravel, do you mind if I ask what might seem like a very strange question? Do your people keep any animals as companions rather than food sources? Pets?" Kiravel's throat sacs contracted with confusion. "Companions? Our culture doesn't. We don't form emotional attachments to other species. Animals serve purposes: nutrition, labor, waste processing. Why would we maintain creatures with no utilitarian function?" "Because sometimes," Dr. Chen said quietly, "the most important relationships aren't utilitarian at all." As the human doctor continued her examination, checking areas and asking questions that hadn't occurred to Kiravel, a disturbing possibility began forming in the Zealothan medical officer's mind. What if her people's systematic, logical approach to the plague had caused them to overlook something obvious? What if their advanced medicine had blinded them to simple solutions? Dr. Chen requested access to the ship's biological database, cross-referencing every living organism aboard the Eternal Dawn against known disease vectors from Earth's medical archives. Her primitive handheld computer looked laughable compared to Zealothan quantum processors, yet the human doctor worked with practiced efficiency. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to an entry in the biological manifest. "These creatures, you call them waste processors. They're arthropods, correct? Insect-like beings that consume organic refuse? The scavenger beetles, yes. They're essential for maintaining ship hygiene. They consume food scraps, dead plant matter, anything that might otherwise create bacterial growth in our waste systems." Kiravel pulled up detailed biological scans of the creatures. "We tested them thoroughly. No signs of viral infection." Dr. Chen studied the data with growing excitement. "That's because they're not infected, they're carriers. Look at their life cycle. They molt every few weeks, shedding their exoskeletons. Those shed casings dry out and become powder that circulates through your air filtration system." The implications hit Kiravel like a physical blow. The pathogen survives in the chitin matrix of their molted shells. Every time they shed, they're dispersing viral particles throughout the ship's atmosphere. And because the beetles themselves aren't sick, Your medical scans wouldn't flag them as a disease vector, Dr. Chen continued. The virus probably adapted to use their molting cycle as a dispersal mechanism. Very clever, actually. For the first time in months, Kiravel felt something approaching hope. If we eliminate the beetles, the existing infections will still need treatment, Dr. Chen cautioned. But you'll stop the reinfection cycle that's been undermining all your therapeutic attempts. Working together, they developed a plan that seemed almost insultingly simple. Rather than targeting the virus directly with sophisticated genetic therapies, they would eliminate its dispersal mechanism by removing the scavenger beetles from the ship's ecosystem. Dr. Yu Chen suggested replacing them with sterilization systems that the humans used aboard their own vessels, basic thermal processing units that broke down organic waste without requiring living organisms. The implementation took 18 hours. Engineering teams, many of them sick but still functional, worked to capture every scavenger beetle aboard the ship and transfer them to isolated containment units. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen and Kiravel collaborated on a treatment approach that combined human and Zealothan medical techniques. Your genetic therapies are incredibly sophisticated, Dr. Chen explained as they prepared the new treatment protocols, but they're designed to work in a stable environment. The constant reinfection from airborne viral particles kept overwhelming your patient's modified immune systems. And your chemical compounds? Simple, brutal, effective. They don't care how smart the virus thinks it is. They attack basic cellular structures that can't adapt fast enough to resist. Dr. Chen smiled through her environmental suit's faceplate. Sometimes you need to fight clever with stupid. The first patients to receive the combined treatment showed improvement within hours. Their symptoms stabilized, then gradually began to recede. As word spread through the ship, Kiravel found herself experiencing something she had never expected to feel again. Optimism. Captain Thainvor visited the medical bay as the first wave of patients was being released from critical care. His scales had regained their natural luster, and his tail moved with renewed energy. The High Council wants to offer the humans anything they desire as payment for their assistance. What do you think they'll ask for? Kiravel considered the question while watching Dr. Chen work with her remaining patients. The human doctor had been aboard their ship for 3 days now, working tirelessly without asking for anything in return. Her methods were simple, her equipment primitive, her approach almost childlike in its directness. Yet she had accomplished what all of Zealothan medical science could not. I think, Kiravel said slowly, that they might not ask for anything at all. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the Eternal Dawn, watching Earth's small scout ship, Meridian, drift alongside the massive Zealothan colony vessel. The size difference was almost comical, like a minnow swimming beside a whale, yet their tiny ship had brought salvation to 12,000 dying souls, using nothing more than curiosity, determination, and what the Zealothans called primitive medicine. Kiravel approached from behind, her movements more fluid than they had been days earlier. The Zealothan medical officer had worked herself to exhaustion during the plague outbreak, and recovery was taking time. The last of the critical patients have been moved to standard care, she reported. Mortality rates have dropped to less than 2%, and new infections have stopped entirely. And the beetles? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer from the daily reports. Contained and thriving in their isolated habitat. Engineering has established sustainable waste processing systems that don't require biological vectors. Kiravel paused, her throat sacs inflating slightly, a sign of amusement among her species. They're calling it human-style waste management in the technical documentation. Sarah smiled at that. Human approaches to complex problems often struck other species as unnecessarily simple, even crude, but simplicity had advantages that advanced civilizations sometimes forgot. How are your people handling the cultural implications? The question struck deeper than medical concerns. For the Zelathans, this crisis had challenged fundamental assumptions about their superiority over lesser species. Their advanced technology, sophisticated medicine, and complex social structures had failed them when they needed them most. Salvation had come from humans, a species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers to the galactic community. "Some are adapting better than others," Kira Vell admitted. "The younger generation seems fascinated by human methods. They're asking questions about Earth medicine, human philosophy, even human social structures. But the elders—" She trailed off, her scales shifting to darker hues. "The elders are struggling with the idea that they needed help from primitives," Sarah finished gently. "It's more complex than simple pride. Our entire civilization is built on the premise that technological advancement leads to superior solutions. We've spent millennia refining our methods, eliminating what we considered crude or inefficient approaches. The possibility that we eliminated something essential—" Kiravel's voice carried genuine uncertainty. Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper implications. This wasn't just about medical treatment. It was about worldview, identity, and the foundations of an entire culture. On Earth, we have a saying: "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." But we also have another one: "Just because something's old doesn't mean it's obsolete." Before Kiravel could respond, Captain Thanevor's voice echoed through the ship's communication system, requesting both officers to report to the main conference chamber. Sarah had never seen the formal meeting space of a Zelathan colony ship, and the sight took her breath away. The chamber was vast, its walls formed from transparent aluminum that offered panoramic views of space. Holographic displays showed star charts, ship system status, and population data that updated in real time. At the center, a circular platform provided seating for what appeared to be hundreds of individuals, though only a dozen elderly Zelathans currently occupied the space. These were the survivors of the High Council, their scales bearing the silver patterns of advanced age and wisdom. Several showed visible signs of recovery from the plague, slightly dulled coloring, careful movements that spoke of recent illness. Yet their bearing remained dignified, authoritative. Captain Thanevor gestured for Sarah and Kiravel to approach the central platform. "Honored counselors, I present Dr. Sarah Chen of Earth, whose assistance proved instrumental in our survival, and our Chief Medical Officer, Kira Vell, whose collaboration made recovery possible." Elder Matriarch Nalazeth, recognizable by the intricate silver patterns covering her cranial scales, stepped forward. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command, but also a humility that seemed new. "Dr. Chen, our people owe you a debt that cannot be measured in standard terms. You arrived when our science had failed, when our medicine offered no hope, and you provided solutions that saved our civilization." Sarah felt uncomfortable with such formal gratitude. "Matriarch, I did what any medical professional would do when faced with suffering. The real credit belongs to Dr. Kiravel and your medical staff who implemented the treatments and saved your people. Yet without your perspective, your willingness to look beyond our assumptions, we would have continued failing until every soul aboard this ship perished." The matriarch's throat sacs, inflated with what Sarah had learned, was a sign of deep emotion among Zelathans. This raises questions that go beyond medical debt. Elder Counselor Teth Miran stepped forward, his movement still stiff from recent illness. "Dr. Chen, your species is young by galactic standards. Humans have been traveling between stars for mere decades, while we have done so for millennia. Yet you approached our crisis with methods and perspectives that our advanced civilization had discarded." Sarah sensed they were building toward something significant. "Sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that experience misses," she replied carefully. "Indeed." The matriarch gestured toward the star charts surrounding them. "We are traveling toward Kepler 442. where we intend to establish a new colony world. Our journey will take 37 more years, during which we'll face challenges we cannot anticipate. This crisis has taught us that our traditional approaches may not always prove sufficient. Counselor Zeth Karan, younger than the others but still bearing marks of authority, spoke next. We wish to extend an invitation. Would you consider remaining aboard our ship for the duration of our journey? Not as passengers, but as cultural and scientific liaisons? We believe there is much our peoples could learn from each other. The request caught Sarah completely off guard. She glanced at Kiravel, who seemed equally surprised by the proposal. That's incredibly generous, but I'm not sure how my government would respond to such an arrangement. The Meridian is an exploration vessel with specific mission parameters. We understand, the matriarch replied. We're prepared to offer compensation for the loss of your ship's services. Our databases contain star charts for sectors of space no human has yet explored, technological innovations that could advance your civilization by centuries, and cultural exchange that would benefit both our species. Sarah's mind raced. The scientific possibilities were staggering. Access to Zealothan databases alone would revolutionize human understanding of the galaxy. But there were practical concerns, political implications, and personal considerations that complicated such a momentous decision. Could I have time to consult with my crew and my government? She asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Dr. Chen... The matriarch's voice carried a note of urgency. This offer comes not just from gratitude, but from necessity. This crisis revealed weaknesses in our civilization that we must address. We need perspectives that our own culture cannot provide. Later, in the medical bay that had become her temporary workspace, Sarah found herself deep in conversation with Kiravel about the implications of the Council's offer. The Zealothan doctor had become more than a colleague over the past week. Their collaboration had forged a friendship that transcended species boundaries. You're concerned about the political ramifications, Kiravel observed as Sarah paced between equipment stations. Among other things, yes, humans are still establishing themselves as a legitimate galactic civilization. Some species view us as dangerous newcomers who advance too quickly, while others see us as primitives who got lucky with a few technological breakthroughs. If we suddenly appear allied with one of the oldest spacefaring cultures, it could destabilize existing power structures, Kiravel finished. The Andromedan Empire in particular has maintained influence through technological superiority. If they discover that primitive humans possess capabilities they lack... Sarah nodded grimly. Galactic politics were complex, with ancient civilizations maintaining careful balances of power based on technological advancement and cultural sophistication. Humanity's rapid expansion into space had already raised concerns among established species. An alliance with the Zealothans could be seen as a threat by civilizations that viewed humans as potential rivals. But there's another aspect to consider, Kiravel continued. Your people's approach to problem-solving represents something valuable that many advanced civilizations have lost. We've become so focused on sophisticated solutions that we've forgotten the power of simple ones. Other species might benefit from exposure to human perspectives. You're suggesting this could be bigger than just Zealothan-human cooperation, Sarah realized. I'm suggesting that your species might serve as a bridge between advanced civilizations that have grown too rigid in their thinking and the innovation that comes from approaching problems with fresh perspectives. Kiravel's scales shifted to lighter hues, indicating excitement or enthusiasm. What if this journey becomes a model for interspecies collaboration? The idea was intriguing, but Sarah remained cautious. That's assuming other species would be interested in learning from humans. Most of them still view us as upstart newcomers. They might change their minds if they saw concrete results, Kiravel pointed out. What we accomplished here, solving a crisis that our advanced medicine couldn't handle, that's proof of concept. if similar successes occurred with other challenges. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's communication device, chirping with an incoming message from the Meridian. Commander Reynolds, her expedition leader, appeared on the small holographic display with news from Earth Command. Dr. Chen, we've received your preliminary report and the Zealothan Council's proposal. Earth Command is very interested in the scientific and diplomatic possibilities, but they want more details about the specific arrangements. Reynolds paused, studying something off-screen. They're also concerned about the length of commitment. 37 years is essentially a career. Sarah had been thinking about that exact issue. Sir, I believe this represents an unprecedented opportunity for human advancement. Access to Zealothan databases alone could accelerate our development by decades. But you're right about the commitment. It would mean spending the rest of my active career aboard this ship. There's another factor to consider, Reynolds continued. Intelligence reports suggest that the Andromedan Empire is expanding their territorial claims in several sectors. Earth Command believes that stronger diplomatic ties with established spacefaring civilizations could provide security benefits for human colonies. The political dimensions were becoming clearer. This wasn't just about scientific exchange or cultural cooperation. It was about humanity's position in an increasingly complex galactic landscape. An alliance with the Zealothans could provide protection, technological advancement, and legitimacy that humans badly needed. Commander, what's Earth Command's official position on the proposal? They're authorizing you to negotiate terms, with the understanding that any agreement would need final approval from the colonial authority. They're particularly interested in the technology transfer aspects and the possibility of establishing formal diplomatic relations. After Reynolds signed off, Sarah found herself staring out at the stars, weighing personal desires against professional obligations. The scientific opportunities aboard the Eternal Dawn were extraordinary, but accepting would mean leaving behind everything familiar for nearly 4 decades. Kiravel approached quietly, having observed the conversation. It's a difficult decision, she said simply. The hardest part is the uncertainty, Sarah admitted. I know what I'm giving up by staying, but I can only guess at what I might gain. Perhaps that uncertainty is exactly what makes it worthwhile, Kiravel suggested. Your people's willingness to embrace the unknown, to take risks for potential rewards, that's part of what makes human approaches effective. Sarah considered this perspective. Humans had always been explorers, pushing into unknown territories despite uncertainty about what they might find. Perhaps this decision represented the same fundamental choice: security versus discovery, familiarity versus growth. There's something else I need to consider, Sarah said after a moment. If I stay, I won't just be representing myself. I'll be representing all of humanity to your people. That's a tremendous responsibility. Yes, it is. But based on what I've observed over the past week, I believe you're prepared for that responsibility. Kiravel's throat sacs inflated with what Sarah had learned was an expression of confidence. You've already changed how my people think about medicine, about problem-solving, about the value of different perspectives. Imagine what could be accomplished over decades of collaboration. As they talked, other members of the Zealothan crew began joining their conversation. Engineers wanted to discuss human approaches to technological development. Agricultural specialists were curious about Earth farming methods. Even social scientists expressed interest in human cultural practices that seemed to promote innovation and adaptability. Sarah realized that her decision wouldn't just affect her own career. It would influence how an entire civilization viewed humanity and their place in the galactic community. The weight of that responsibility was daunting, but also energizing. I need to discuss this with my crew, she told Kiravel. But I think this might be exactly the kind of challenge humans are meant to face. That evening, Sarah gathered with her small crew in the Meridian's common area. The 5 other humans aboard their ship represented various specialties: engineering, navigation, communications, security, and cultural analysis. Each would be affected by whatever decision she made. "I won't pretend this is easy," she began, explaining the full scope of the Zealothan offer. "If we accept, we're committing to nearly 4 decades aboard an alien vessel, helping establish a colony on a world none of us have seen." Lieutenant Morrison, their chief engineer, spoke first. "Dr. Chen, from a technical standpoint, this is an incredible opportunity. The Zealothans use technologies that Earth won't develop for centuries. The engineering insights alone could revolutionize human space travel." Specialist Kaur, their cultural analyst, nodded in agreement. "And the sociological implications are staggering. We'd be documenting the establishment of an entirely new civilization, observing how an advanced species adapts to colonial life." But Security Chief Holbrook raised practical concerns. "What about our families? Our commitments back home? 37 years is longer than most people's entire careers." It was Navigator Brooks who provided the perspective that resonated most with Sarah. "We signed up for exploration, for pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and presence in space. This is exactly what we trained for, even if it's bigger than anything we imagined." The discussion continued late into the ship's night cycle, covering everything from personal sacrifice to scientific opportunity to the broader implications for human civilization. When they finally reached a decision, it was unanimous. They would accept the Zealothan offer, with the understanding that Earth Command would need to approve the formal arrangements. The next morning, Sarah stood before the Zealothan High Council with her answer. "Honored counselors, on behalf of my crew, and with the preliminary approval of Earth Command, we accept your invitation to join your journey to Kepler 442. The response was immediate and profound. Throat sacs throughout the chamber inflated with joy, scales shifted to brighter hues, and several counselors began the rhythmic tail movements that indicated celebration among their species. Matriarch Nalazeth stepped forward, her movements formal, but her voice warm. "Dr. Chen, you honor us with your acceptance. This marks the beginning of a new era for both our species." As the formal ceremonies began, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation about the journey ahead. She was leaving behind everything familiar to venture into the unknown with an alien civilization, armed with nothing but human curiosity and the growing conviction that miracles sometimes came disguised as simple solutions to complex problems. 5 years had passed since Dr. Sarah Chen and her crew joined the Zealothan colony ship Eternal Dawn on its journey to Kepler 442. The vessel that had once carried the desperate survivors of a plague now bustled with renewed life and unprecedented collaboration between 2 very different species. Kiravel stood in what had become known as the Integration Laboratory, watching human and Zealothan researchers work side by side on problems that neither species could solve alone. The lab occupied an entire deck of the massive ship, filled with equipment that combined human ingenuity with Zealothan sophistication in ways that consistently produced remarkable results. "The atmospheric processors for New Haven are functioning beyond projected parameters," reported Engineer Morrison, now wearing modified environmental gear designed by Zealothan biotechnicians. The human's adaptation to life aboard the ship had been remarkable, though his tendency to solve complex problems with elegantly simple solutions still amazed the Zealothan Engineering Corps. New Haven, that was what they had named their destination world. The planet circling Kepler 442 would be home to both species, a joint colony that represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Traditional colonization efforts involved single species claiming entire worlds, but the collaboration born from the plague crisis had evolved into something far more ambitious. "Sarah, you need to see this," called Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a biochemist who had joined the expedition 3 years earlier when Earth Command approved additional human personnel for the mission. She stood before a holographic display showing molecular structures that seemed to dance in three-dimensional space. Sarah approached, noting the excitement in Tanaka's voice. Over the years, she had learned to recognize when breakthrough discoveries were imminent. "What have you found?" "Kiravel and I have been working on the atmospheric modification requirements for New Haven," Tanaka explained, gesturing toward complex chemical diagrams. "The planet's atmosphere is breathable for both species, but barely. We need to increase oxygen content by 12% and reduce sulfur compounds by nearly 30%. Traditional terraforming would take centuries," Kiravel added, her scales bright with enthusiasm. "But by combining human biological engineering with our atmospheric manipulation technology, we can do it in decades," Sarah finished, studying the projected timeline. "How?" Tanaka's explanation revealed the elegant fusion of approaches that had become the hallmark of human-Zealothan collaboration. Instead of using massive industrial processors to gradually alter planetary atmosphere, they would introduce specially modified microorganisms, Earth bacteria enhanced with Zealothan genetic manipulation techniques, that would consume sulfur compounds while producing oxygen at accelerated rates. "The beauty is in the redundancy," Kiravel explained. "Human biological approaches are robust but unpredictable. Zealothan technological systems are precise but vulnerable to unexpected variables. Together, they create resilient solutions that can adapt to changing conditions." Sarah marveled at how naturally the two species had learned to work together. What had begun as a desperate medical collaboration had evolved into systematic cooperation across every field of knowledge. The results were extraordinary, but the process had not been without challenges. The early years had been difficult for both species. Zealothan crew members struggled with human directness and tendency to ignore established hierarchies. Humans found Zealothan formal protocols tedious and their reluctance to experiment frustrating. Cultural misunderstandings led to conflicts that required patient mediation from leaders on both sides. But gradually, mutual respect had developed. Zealothans learned to appreciate human adaptability and willingness to take calculated risks. Humans gained understanding of the benefits that came from careful planning and systematic approaches to complex problems. Most importantly, both species discovered that their different perspectives made them stronger when working together. Captain Thane Vor entered the integration lab, his movements carrying the confident bearing of a leader whose people had not merely survived their crisis, but thrived beyond it. "Dr. Chen, we're receiving communication from the Galactic Trade Council. They're requesting permission to send an observation delegation to examine our—" He paused, searching for the right term. "Unprecedented cooperation." Sarah wasn't surprised. Word of the human-Zealothan collaboration had spread throughout the galaxy over the past 5 years, generating reactions ranging from fascination to concern among other spacefaring civilizations. Some species viewed their partnership as a promising model for interspecies cooperation. Others worried about the implications of two previously separate civilizations becoming so closely allied. "What's the Trade Council's stated purpose?" she asked. "Scientific and diplomatic observation," Captain Thane Vor replied. "But Intelligence Officer Kel Nath believes they're more interested in assessing potential military implications. A human-Zealothan alliance could shift the balance of power in several sectors." The political ramifications had been a constant concern throughout their journey. Earth Command maintained regular communication with the expedition, providing updates on galactic developments that might affect their mission. The Andromedan Empire had expressed particular interest in their collaboration, though whether that interest was friendly or hostile remained unclear. "There's another factor," the captain continued. "The delegation includes representatives from the Vegan Confederacy and the Centauri Republic. Both have experienced internal conflicts that traditional diplomacy couldn't resolve. They may be looking for alternative approaches to problem solving. Kiravel's throat sacs inflated, with what Sarah had learned was a sign of cautious optimism. This could be an opportunity to demonstrate the benefits of cross-species collaboration to other civilizations. Or it could expose us to interference from species who don't want to see humans and Zelathans working together, Sarah countered. We need to be very careful about what we reveal and how we present our cooperation. Over the following weeks, preparations for the delegation's arrival consumed much of the ship's attention. The human crew worked with their Zelathan counterparts to develop presentations that would showcase their collaborative achievements without revealing sensitive information about their joint technologies. The process itself became another example of their successful partnership. Humans contributed insights about diplomatic presentation and cross-cultural communication, while Zelathans provided expertise in galactic protocol and the complex political relationships between various spacefaring species. When the delegation's ships finally arrived, Sarah was struck by the diversity of the group. The Vegan vessel was organic in design, grown rather than constructed, its living hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The Centauri ship appeared to be built from crystalline materials that refracted starlight into spectacular rainbow displays. Even the Trade Council's transport showed influences from multiple civilizations, suggesting the widespread interest in their mission. The first formal meeting took place in the Eternal Dawn's main conference chamber, now modified to accommodate representatives from 5 different species with varying environmental requirements. Sarah found herself serving as spokesperson for the human contingent, a role she had never expected when she first joined the mission. Ambassador Velthara of the Vegan Confederacy spoke first, her voice carrying harmonics that the translation systems rendered as musical undertones. We have traveled far to observe this unprecedented cooperation between Zelathans and humans. Our own civilization faces challenges that traditional approaches cannot resolve. We hope to learn from your experiences. The Centauri representative, whose crystalline physiology required special lighting conditions, resonated agreement through subsonic frequencies. The Republic has monitored your progress with great interest. Your joint technological developments suggest possibilities that single-species research cannot achieve. Trade Council Director Zeph Morgan, representing an alliance of merchant species, was more direct in his assessment. The economic implications of your collaboration are staggering. Joint human Zelathan colonies could revolutionize interstellar trade. But there are also concerns about market disruption and the potential for technological advantages that could destabilize existing commercial relationships. Sarah chose her words carefully. Our collaboration began with a medical emergency that required immediate solutions. What we discovered was that combining different approaches to problem solving often produces better results than either species could achieve independently. Our goal isn't to disrupt existing galactic relationships, but to explore the benefits of interspecies cooperation. Over the following days, the delegation toured various sections of the ship, observing joint research projects, integrated living quarters where humans and Zelathans had learned to share space comfortably, and the ongoing preparations for their colonial mission. Each species showed particular interest in different aspects of the collaboration. The Vegans were fascinated by the biological integration approaches, especially the atmospheric modification project that would transform New Haven into a world suitable for multiple species. Their own civilization had developed advanced biological technologies, but always within the context of a single species' needs. The Centauri focused on the technological fusion aspects, particularly interested in how human and Zelathan engineering principles had been combined to create more robust systems than either could produce alone. Their crystalline technology was incredibly sophisticated but inflexible. They struggled with adaptation when conditions changed unexpectedly. The Trade Council representatives concentrated on the practical implications of joint colonization and the potential for expanded commerce between human and Zealothan territories. They asked detailed questions about resource allocation, decision-making processes, and conflict resolution methods. But it was during an informal gathering in the Integration Lab that the most significant exchange occurred. Dr. Tanaka was demonstrating the atmospheric modification organisms when Ambassador Velthara made an unexpected observation. "These biological solutions require trust," the Vegan representative said, studying the microscopic organisms through a quantum scope. "Your species are introducing living systems that will permanently alter a planet's environment. If the organisms evolve unexpectedly or if your cooperation fails, the consequences could be catastrophic for both civilizations." Kira Vel responded before Sarah could speak. "Trust is exactly the foundation of our collaboration. When Dr. Chen first arrived during our plague crisis, we had to trust that her primitive methods could succeed where our advanced medicine had failed. That trust has grown over 5 years of working together. But trust between individuals is different from trust between civilizations," the Centauri representative resonated. "What happens when your current leaders are replaced? What happens if political pressures force changes in your cooperative agreements?" It was a question that had worried Sarah throughout the journey. Their collaboration worked because of personal relationships built during crisis and maintained through years of mutual respect. But both human and Zealothan civilizations were much larger than the crews aboard this single ship. "That's why we're documenting everything," Sarah explained. "Not just the technical achievements, but the processes that made them possible. The methods for building trust, resolving conflicts, combining different approaches to problems. We're creating a model that other groups could adapt to their own circumstances." The delegation spent 2 weeks aboard the Eternal Dawn, observing, questioning, and participating in various collaborative projects. By the end of their visit, each species had reached different conclusions about the human-Zealothan partnership. The Vegans requested permission to send a permanent observer to New Haven, hoping to learn from the colonial establishment process. The Centauri proposed a limited research exchange, offering access to their crystalline technologies in return for insights into collaborative problem-solving methods. The Trade Council's response was more complex. They formally recognized the Human-Zealothan Alliance and established preliminary trade agreements, but also expressed concerns about the precedent being set. Other species were already beginning to explore cooperative relationships based on the Eternal Dawn model. "Change is coming to the galaxy whether we like it or not," Director Zeph Morgan told Sarah during their final meeting. "Your collaboration has demonstrated possibilities that many species didn't know existed. Some will embrace these opportunities. Others will resist them. The challenge will be managing the transition without destabilizing existing relationships." After the delegation departed, Sarah found herself in the observation lounge where she had spent so many hours over the past 5 years, watching the stars and contemplating the implications of their journey. Kiravel joined her, as she often did during these quiet moments. "Do you think we've done the right thing?" Sarah asked. "Opening this door to interspecies collaboration might create as many problems as it solves." Kiravel considered the question carefully. "When you first arrived during our plague crisis, I thought your methods were primitive, possibly dangerous. I was wrong about primitive. But you were dangerous. Dangerous to my assumptions, to my certainty that our way was the only correct way." Her scales shifted to thoughtful hues. "Perhaps the galaxy needs that kind of danger, even if it disrupts civilizations that have been stable for millennia. Stability that depends on isolation and rigid thinking isn't really stability. It's stagnation," Kiravel replied. "Your species taught us that. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is remain exactly as you are." As they talked, alerts began chiming throughout the ship. Sarah checked her personal communicator and felt her breath catch. Long-range sensors were detecting their destination system. After 5 years of travel, they were approaching Kepler 442. New Haven awaited them, a world that would become home to both humans and Zelathans, a living laboratory for interspecies cooperation, and potentially a model for the galaxy's future. The planet would test everything they had learned about working together, about combining different approaches to achieve common goals. But Sarah no longer doubted their ability to succeed. She had learned to trust in something she had never believed in before their crisis began. Not miracles, but the simple power of different minds working together toward shared objectives. Standing beside her friend and colleague, watching the stars of their new home system grow brighter in the distance, Sarah realized that the greatest discovery of their journey hadn't been technological or medical. They had learned that the universe was vast enough for multiple approaches to every problem, complex enough to require diverse perspectives, and beautiful enough to be worth the risks of reaching beyond familiar boundaries. The colony they would establish on New Haven would face countless challenges: environmental, political, social, and technological. But they would face those challenges together, with the combined wisdom of two species who had learned to see strength in their differences rather than threats. As the eternal dawn continued its approach to their new home, Sarah Chen smiled, remembering the title Kira Vell had given her in the medical files from their first crisis: the human who named our salvation a beginning. It had taken 5 years to understand what that meant, but now she knew. They weren't just establishing a colony, they were planting the seeds of a different future, one where the galaxy's vast diversity became a source of strength rather than division. Whether that future would grow into something beautiful or something chaotic remained to be seen. But Sarah had learned to trust in the process, to believe in the power of different species working together toward common goals. She had learned to believe in miracles disguised as collaboration, in solutions that emerged from the intersection of different ways of thinking. The stars of New Haven's system continued to brighten as they approached their destination, promising new challenges, new opportunities, and new tests of everything they had learned about the value of reaching beyond familiar boundaries into the unknown.